My talk is billed as the art of the interview, but it's missing a colon. The colon is the interview tool. The world is not a good place when colons are missing. They can change everything. I've been at CBC Radio for about 400 years, and over the course of that time, I've done thousands of interviews, and these days I talk to writers, Canadian writers, on a program called The Next Chapter. I think it's absolutely amazing that CBC lets me interview writers at all. For my debut, I interviewed someone at the top. I talked to Timothy Finley back in 1978. Perhaps you've heard of him. I had not. So this was a while ago, Kingston, Ontario. I was hosting, researching, and producing a daily television program, and I was also the late-night wacky weather woman. I was 22, and I was very, very green. A publicist called me up and asked me if I wanted to interview Timothy Finley because he'd just won a Governor General's Award for the wars. And I said, sure. She said she would send me some material. She didn't, and I couldn't reach her. But I thought, oh, I'll be fine even without research. Well, Timothy Finley showed up live for this interview, and it was a live interview, with this awfully nice man named Bill, whom I took to be his driver. And I love this crowd. I began by asking Timothy Finley what he did in the wars to receive a Governor General's Award. And he said, well, actually, I won it for writing a book called The Wars. And I said, you can win it for writing a book? And I thought it was a military honor. And Timothy Finley said, no, it's a literary award presented annually for the book judged to be the best fiction in Canada of the year. I gulped audibly, and then Timothy Finley said, would you like to know what happens in the wars? And I said, yes, oh yes. I said, please tell me about it, and please tell me about yourself. There is a PS to this, if you fast forward a decade. At this point, I was hosting a national arts program on the radio, and Margaret Lawrence had just died, and it was determined that we would speak to three of her closest friends, Audrey Thomas, Alice Munro, and Timothy Finley. And Timothy Finley walks into the studio with the same Bill, and he says, oh, look, Bill, there's that gal from Kingston. And I say to Timothy Finley, I can't believe you still have the same driver. But as you may know, Bill Whitehead was Timothy Finley's partner for more than 30 years. So this story fits my title, and certainly the subtitle, The Interview Tool. Yes, I was a tool. I didn't do my homework for this interview, and I was very lucky that master storyteller Timothy Finley saved my ass bacon. For years, though, I was mortified by this story, but I see it differently now, and very recently I was helped to by a much younger person. I learned something very valuable. It wasn't about how you always have to read the book if you're interviewing an author, or doing your research, and I promise you that is a given now. But it was that this was survivable. It was survivable because I wanted to know who this fake soldier, Timothy Finley, really was. And it was survivable because I was very curious about him. I'd formed an identity for him in my mind, but the reality didn't match up in any way. And so I asked him to tell me about himself. We so often form an identity for other people, and the reality doesn't match up, but we don't get to have that conversation. Timothy Finley, an elder in what Margaret Lawrence at the time called the tribe of Canadian writers, also showed me a great generosity of spirit. He could have walked off in high dudgeon. He could have walked off in low dudgeon, actually. I don't really know what dudgeon is, but he did not. He instead told me, a fledgling interviewer, his story. Tell me about you, your life, your experience, your thoughts on a given matter. Tell me about, I think, is the most powerful phrase there is, and it is wide open and neutral. Psychotherapists tell us that people have to have a narrative. Our life stories tell us we get to know ourselves by understanding what the stories of our lives are. Alan Jones writes in a book called The Soul's Journey, we need stories that take note of our frailty and foolishness and yet honor our deepest longings and highest aspirations, stories that will heal our wounded imaginations. The radio, I think, is a place where strangers can meet and then enter your life. You may listen to my conversation with a writer, Robert Wiersma, say, and you hear our conversation and you realize that this is a smart and engaging fellow, and you'd like to read his book. Or perhaps the book that he reviewed for us recently called A Crowbar in the Buddhist's Garden by Stephen Reed, which is up now for a City of Victoria Butler Book Prize. Interviews on the radio provide a zone where people can meet the other, people we wouldn't necessarily meet in the course of our everyday lives, in our neighborhoods, which are becoming less and less connected to others. Think of condos, think of gated communities, think of islands even. A place where our lives can intersect with each other. And on radio, the information enters through the ears, obviously, but that is the fast track to our brain. It is intimate. People share their stories in the theater of the mind. The first time I filled in for Peter Zosky as deputy host of Morningside, well, a call came on a Sunday night, and I was having a dinner party, and the legendary Shelley Ambrose was there too. The phone rang, and it was Peter's executive producer saying, tomorrow's the day, you have to fill in for Peter. He's hurt his back, and he's in a lot of pain. Well, would I fill in? Yes, that was my job. I sent my guests home with doggy bags. Shelley made me drink about 10 gallons of water, and the enormity of what I had to do the next morning hit me like a rogue wave. How do you fill in for the great interviewer? How does Dorothy fill in for Oz? So I called Peter and I said, dude, what do I do? And he said, well, just listen. And I said, yeah, and then what? And he said, no, that's it. Just listen. Yesterday on the radio, I heard Margaret Atwood saying to Michael Enright that we are hardwired for stories. Stories are how we learn. Jane Jacobs told me in an interview that stories are what deliver the truth. Richard Wagamese, the Ojibwe writer, says stories are what will level the ground, and stories can alter us at a cellular level. This morning at 8, a sacred fire was lit at Ambleside Beach in Vancouver. That fire has a connection to our topic this evening, conversation. Certainly some of the best and maybe even the earliest conversations were held and have been held around a fire. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission will hold its British Columbia national event in Vancouver this week, and each day the sessions begin with prayers around a fire. Then we will hear stories from survivors of the residential school era, stories that will emerge from one question. Tell me about what happened to you. Stories that will heal our wounded imaginations. Stories that will heal Canada if we just listen. Thank you.